When the mob and the press and the whole world tell you to move, your job is to plant yourself like a tree by the river of truth and say to the whole world, no, you move. This is a quote from Captain America in Civil War: The Amazing Spider-Man by J. Michael Straczynski. And every time I hear it, I get this rush of adrenaline, this overwhelming need to stand up and fight for what I believe in, and also to work out just a little bit more. And it's this incredible inspirational quote. And it's also completely wrong. The history of America is not filled with glorious defenders of righteous entrenched beliefs, as much as we might like to convince ourselves otherwise. It's filled with compromise, with give and take and back and forth in all their gritty, miserable glory. The ideal of democracy is founded upon the idea that those with opposing beliefs can come together and build something new that makes everyone equally miserable. In order to return our society to one that once again functions healthily, we must learn again how to compromise. In this speech, I hope to assert the point that those with a strong sense of justice are actually inhibiting the progress of our nation in the name of bringing about its salvation. By looking at a history of American compromise, what makes it a more difficult practice today, and how that makes it more important than ever, I hope to convince each of you that a strong sense of right and wrong is just wrong for our country. So let's talk about a history of American compromise. I want to cover two specific things, which are government structure and legal decisions made along the way. Now, in government structure, let's talk about Congress and separation of powers. Now, in Congress, we have represented one of the earliest conflicts in the construction of the federal government, which was big states versus little states. How did New York and Rhode Island get equal representation? Well, we came up with something that's called the bicameral legislature. So we have a House of Representatives, where you get a number of representatives relative to your state's population, and we also have a Senate, where regardless of your state's population, you get 2 representatives. So New York and Rhode Island are stoked about that. And we also have what's called the separation of powers. Now, if you don't know, our federal government has 3 separate branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. And these 3 branches have to work together in order for our government to function. And this creates what's called a system of checks and balances. Now, how do we know that this compromise works in our government? We've seen it work over time. America has undergone numerous political crises, scandals, tragedies, you name it, we've gone through it. And according to Mark Gates' 2011 article titled "On the Need for a Strong Defense," quote, "In each of these cases, however painful and divisive these episodes were, our nation's governing institutions recovered their equilibrium and their ability to function." So let's also talk about some legal compromises made in our history. So first I want to talk about the Compromise of 1790. Now, if you don't know what that is, don't worry, you're probably in good company. It was a long time ago, but you should listen to Hamilton, American Musical. But in short, the Compromise of 1790 was a deal made between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, and it created Hamilton's financial plan, and it gave Jefferson the nation's capital where he wanted it. And according to Jacob Cook's 1970 article titled "The Compromise of 1790, quote, "It is generally regarded as one of the most important bargains in American history." Why? 2 reasons. Number 1, as aforementioned, it gave us the financial system and the capital that we have today. And 2, it was one of the first major compromises between 2 political parties, the Federalists in the North and the Democratic Republicans in the South. Now, in addition to the Compromise of 1790, I want to talk about the slave compromises, which were a set of compromises made leading up to the Civil War, which attempted to alleviate the effects of slavery. And this is the Three Fifths Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, and the Missouri Compromise. And while these were ultimately ineffectual at their goal, what they did do was preserve the Union long enough that it could grow to the point where it could withstand something like the Civil War and come out somewhat intact on the other side. And regardless, slavery was going to be one of those issues where compromise wasn't going to be the solution. According to Jack Earl's 2011 article titled "Political Origins of the Civil War," quote, "By the 1850s, compromise-minded politicians in Washington were no match for those on either side determined to prevail completely in forcing the other side to accept its version of slavery." So now that we've talked about how compromise has a role in American history, I want to talk about a couple things that are making it more difficult today. So first, let's talk about social media. Now, if you don't know, social media has in essence today become a wind tunnel. Each of us follow the people that we agree with, the people that we like to listen to, whose opinions, ideals, and beliefs align with and influence our own. And this is damaging something called issue fatigue. According to Jen Glazer's 2006 article titled "Public Support for a Political Compromise in a Volatile Racial Issue," quote, "For a prolonged stalemate, issue fatigue may lead some individuals to welcome a compromise that makes the debate go away." In other words, we used to get tired of fighting. We used to just get sick of it. But we don't really anymore, because we duke it out in the Facebook comment section, then we come back, we listen to our favorite podcast or our favorite Twitter person, and then we're ready to go back out into the world and fight once again. And so this is damaging compromise's health in contemporary society. Now, another thing that's making compromise harder is the Christian church. There are several cases where the Christian church has persecuted individuals who have given or spoken beliefs outside of the orthodoxy. And two examples I want to talk about today, although there are countless, are the band Gungor and the speaker Rob Bell. Now, if you don't know, Gungor is a former Christian worship band who, after posting a blog citing disagreements with the scriptural or literal inerrancy of Genesis, was fired from the church that they helped plant. And according to a statement from Lisa Gungor in a 2018 Relevant magazine article, quote, "In the tribe we were born into, questions weren't allowed. Doubt was the opposition of faith, and so if you doubt, you're seen as a bad person." Now, another example of this is the speaker, author, and former megachurch pastor, Rob Bell. Now, after publishing the book Love Wins, which posited the theory that there might not be such a thing as hell, Rob Bell received this response. According to John Meacham's 2011 Time magazine article, quote, "When word of Love Wins reached the internet, conservative evangelical pastor John Piper tweeted, 'Farewell, Rob Bell,' unilaterally attempting to evict Bell from the evangelical community." Now, Christians are more than welcome to disagree with people who disagree with their beliefs. In fact, I encourage it. But when the end result of this disagreement becomes eviction from the community rather than open discussion, this is no longer the way of Christ or the way of love, but the way of dictators, authoritarian thugs, and fear. So now that we've talked about a history of American compromise, as well as some things that make it more difficult today, I want to talk about why that difficulty makes it more important than ever. Now, compromise accomplishes essentially two things. Number one, it gives a voice to the voiceless. According to the aforementioned Glaser article, compromise often fails to meet the complete interest of those who agree to it. In other words, compromise makes people unhappy because you don't get what you want. It's pretty self-explanatory, but it's doing this because it's requiring people of power and privilege to give up some of that power and privilege in order for those without a voice to gain some sense of representation. Now, the second thing that compromise accomplishes is that it calls us to deny ourselves. It calls us to lay these things down. As we just talked about, in compromise, people with power and privilege must give up something so that those without it can gain something. And for example, like the slave compromises that we talked about today, while those weren't effective at abolishing slavery, what they did do was create free states so that slaves could have an opportunity to potentially become free. Now, why does this being difficult make it important? Well, it's not important only socially and politically, but it's also important religiously. The teachings of Christ and the Bible call us to compromise. Matthew 16:24, Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone wishes to come after me, they must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me." And in Proverbs 31:8, we read, "Speak out for all those who are vulnerable, and defend the rights of those without a voice." And in this, we see that not only should we morally, socially, and politically be defending and pursuing compromise, but religiously we should be pursuing compromise. So today we've talked about a history of American compromise. We've looked at some things that are making it more difficult in contemporary society, and we've talked about why those same difficulties make it more important than ever. And I hope you don't walk away thinking that I dislike people with strong morals. I really don't. But I believe that today, more than ever, more than people with a strong sense of black and white, right and wrong, us or them, we need people who see people. We need people who can look past ethnic and social and racial and political and economic differences and see fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters and neighbors. Now, in about 25 minutes, you're probably going to forget everything that I just said. And by this time next week, you're probably going to forget that this night ever happened. But if you forget all of those things, don't forget this. There is far more that unites us than there ever will be that divides us. Thank you.